question.
I have a question after reading all this.
Sir, a little more slowly and clearly.
I have a question regarding globalization.
Yes.
You teach a course in globalization, yeah?
Yes.
I would like to know from you, do you think globalization favor the rich or favor more the strongest ones? The ones that were able to fight more? Because if you look at this, I mean, it's...
The quick, simple answer is it depends on the local context, or the context. National and local, differing largely by country, by region, by city, by economic position within unions, within business organizations, which may be highly developed in the West, whereas, say, in China, it's the Communist Party is more important. And then which has the larger welfare state benefits for citizens? The U.S. or China?
Probably China.
That's what you would think. Yeah. Thinking of the normal East, the left-right European thinking leads you to the right answer. Empirically, you're wrong.
But they have way more people, yeah?
Yeah, of course. But they have more money. So the absolute numbers, why should the absolute numbers change? Now that is, when I first heard this, it came to me from Chinese students who said, we don't have health insurance. We don't have all these kinds of retirement benefits, these things. Okay. And that's part of why the economic growth has been so much more successful. It costs a lot to support the benefits through the taxes, which slows down the economy. So it's had the Chinese have been very successful, tripling whatever the growth rates of the Europeans and the Americans. And part of it is what they do domestically. And globalization is a critical part of that, because not only the Chinese, so did the Koreans, the Japanese. They followed from after World War II until roughly until more recently, and it still is continuing right now, as the Chinese are trying, because they're having an economic, they're not having a downturn, they're just slow, they're growing a little, they're still growing more than twice as fast as the Americans, I think. But it's and so the Wall Street Journal says, the Chinese are having a decline. They're still growing much faster than the Americans and the Europeans.
But I have a question. If you look at the American companies and the European companies from
how's our image? Is that okay?
There you go.
Okay.
You need to put it a bit higher.
Just a little. Okay, and I'll back up a little bit.
Like this is perfect.
Okay. Yeah, actually, but if for my notes, is that okay now?
Yeah.
Okay, good. So go ahead with the European country.
Yeah, but if you look at the European companies and the American companies before the Chinese came,
then I'm just going to let the viewers know what these good questions are coming to you from a Spanish student who's sophisticated, and you've got a master's degree in international relations, so these are smart questions. So go ahead.
So, but if you look at the European companies at the EU, right, and American companies before the Chinese came, right, they were doing much better. They will argue, right, because now you go to Target or anywhere or any big shop here in the U.S. and most of the things are made in China, right? Which before was not the case in the 1950s, right? So now with the globalization, competition is much, let's say, stronger, harder,
Yes, yes.
So people in the booth school would say globalization favor the ones who were able to fight more, yeah?
How is your health? Are you more comfortable?
I'm good. I'm good now.
105%?
Yeah. For sure.
Okay, very good.
I test myself multiple times for COVID and it's all negative.
Very good. Good for you. Sorry. So go ahead. So Target, how do we compare well, we got multiple participants. We've got, say, the target company. We've got the producers of the products they're selling, the purchasers of the goods they're selling. How do you measure the poor people getting a good or a bad deal from any of these? How do you match up the leftist left-right classification of the poor to connect to those different producers? It's complicated.
So you mean from the consumer point of view,
The main answer would be the poor are benefiting through as consumers, not as a union member. Of course they're not producing in Spain to sell to China, which comes back to, I mean, there may be a little bit, I mean, but most of it is coming from China, maybe sold in Spain, I don't know, is Target a brand in Spain?
No, it's not.
Okay, but say a Spanish version of Target.
Yeah, Joe Trader, for example.
Yeah, okay, so that, but, I mean, but the hard thing is to measure the amount of benefit that poor people get. And I think the normal analysis from Marxism, from business magazines, from investors is production. But if you add production and consumption, then you get the opposite results. Or maybe that is the question is how to measure this is very, very hard. But if you leave out consumption, we know it's wrong. And that's the simplest, easy way to put. I mean, the poor people don't own. I mean, they're not the major owners of the producers. They don't own the target company.
Yeah.
They may work in but the proportion of people who work in target company is tiny. The big thing is thousands of consumers. But because the consumers don't shout, they don't have parades and demonstrations, but that's how they benefit.
But just the last question. Did globalization...
That doesn't have to be the last.
But because in the booth they will argue that globalization created really big companies. So you got two big blocks. One is the consumers, and the other one is companies getting bigger and bigger and bigger. Is that correct?
Maybe that is, again, I would say it depends on what the factors are driving the size of those companies. Just casually, I sense there are more of these big companies in France than I see in the U.S. They have bigger grocery stores. They have bigger bookstores. I mean, not all of them. You still have that is one of the sources of an example of the distinctions between the simple normal left-right classification and the symbolics, which are very different. Or let me introduce the French case. So I lived there for several years, and I saw this happening under de Gaulle. And de Gaulle was a very high-tech oriented. Many of the top French elites are trained in mathematics, artillery, and military. That's what Napoleon wanted. He wanted artillery and people who could, you know, do that mathematically. So that the French educational system trains the elites, and they go into the civil service, not the private sector. Okay, so de Gaulle himself was the head of a tank division in the 1930s, and he said these Germans are really building these really good tanks. He said, the French, we've got to have good tanks or we're going to be destroyed. And everybody ignored him, and France was, destroyed in 2 days or something, whatever.
Blitzkrieg.
Yes. Okay. So de Gaulle, after the war, when he came to power, he said, we've got to have high tech, and the French companies are lousy. They're way behind the world and the Americans. And so he then, as president, had much more control over the banking system of who would get the loans, which companies would get big loans, and also militarily, how can we show we are independent? Two things. So he talked up, we're independent militarily, and so France was the first country in the world to have a separate nuclear bomb.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so they did that, and de Gaulle was all written up in the Western press, especially the American press. De Gaulle is, he's militarily, he's independent, et cetera, et cetera. Then nobody looked and nobody talked about who got the loans. The Americans. The French banks had competing applications from middle-sized and smaller companies. The banks, if they looked the same, it's like affirmative action. They gave them to the Americans. And what those American companies either bought or built factories in France, and they built some of these very technologically advanced, and they drove out the little French shops into bankruptcy. That is, many of them either closed, either they stayed the same, or they went into bankruptcy, or they were brought up. So the French modernized in terms of technology using American management, basically. It was some American capital, but most of it was French capital through the French banks. But what de Gaulle wanted was the smart managers, the tough American managers, whereas the French were traditionally more clientelist. Were working with their people, their banks, their employees, and they paid more attention to the unions, whereas the Americans fought the unions inside France. So it built a more technologically advanced French economy in ways that nobody knew about at the time, except a few people. I mean, it took me years to find this out from people talking about it. Okay, so I'm citing this not because you should know all of those details, but I'm giving you an answer that it depends on the nation and the political system, and to go. I mean, and you could do this, for instance, only for steel or only for retail trade. So the Chinese and the Americans with Trump are been much more explicit about propagandistic, or let's say symbolic, higher tariffs. No, we want lower. So the Americans would say, we're getting too many of these green solar panels coming from China because the Americans can't match the prices and the quality. The Chinese are making better, cheaper these panels, and so they're selling them in large numbers. And then are they subsidized? No. So maybe even if I don't know, but Biden and the Americans are subsidizing their green solar panels to try to compete with the Chinese. And so the Chinese are now, so right now, when the Chinese are trying to sell everything cheaper, the French and the Americans are coming back and say, we're going to impose tariffs on you. And they're responding, you've got tariffs or you're subsidizing your green industries more than we are, and I don't know if they said more than, because those are very hard to measure, but that's the kind of stuff which is in the press today, so I'm not saying any of this is right or wrong, but they're symbolically important, and there are clearly industrial differences which do reflect industrial organization, where steel, for instance, may be traditionally better, but right now, the largest company in the whole Chicago area, traditionally, and the largest in Pittsburgh, was steel. So it was the United States Steel Company, right there at Gary, South Chicago, Hammond. All this stuff this was the classic image of manufacturing was Chicago. Like, could we turn the, turn that, yeah. I knew a guy who went to law school here, and he was one of the top I think he was the top attorney in Chicago. Then he switched to Pittsburgh, and then he was hired by the mayor to be the chief of staff of the city of Pittsburgh, and that's when I really got filled in on this stuff, because Pittsburgh is a very important city. It's one of the first cities where we found what we call the new political culture. So I don't want to get too well. It just it's part of the story, in the sense that he brought to that a sense of breaking the rules and building a whole new approach to left and right and democratic and clientelist and unions and so forth.
Just because of the steel.
Because of his approach, where the traditional model failed, and so this traditional model failed both in France and in the U.S. So I don't want to go into too many. There was a woman who came here. She was under Mitterrand. So Mitterrand was a major socialist leader, and she later became prime minister. But she came with about 200 French business leaders, and they were touring the U.S. to probably talk about how can we sell French products and trade more with the U.S. So we had a 1-hour talk show here in Chicago. Just mainly me and her. And so the big question which I said, Chicago is a steel producing company. We're really looking for France, which has more experience with socialism and subsidies and helping the disadvantaged than the U.S. does. We have more. Okay, so are there lessons that we can learn from the French steel industry as to how to compete internationally, to improve, etc.? And she laughed and said, "Learn from the Americans on this, close the steel companies." That's what she said. And basically they did. They cut way back. And this week, in the news, the United States Steel Company, the largest steel company in the U.S., is ready to be purchased by a Japanese company, and the U.S. government is potentially blocking it because it's so symbolically important. We're losing our biggest steel company to the Japanese, and which has basically been much more high tech and better managed for 30 years, 40 years, and with what you see right now. But the simple bottom line I'm giving your answer is, it depends on the industry, the country, and the city. And yeah, okay. And second, some of these benefits are very hard to measure because they're indirect. So for instance, just one quote: when the taxpayers' revolt started in California with Proposition 13, 1978, I think that's right. So everyone, all the political leaders, the civic leaders, the media, all said, don't do this. They had signs everywhere. We will lose the university system. We'll lose the freeways. The public schools in California will be a disaster because they cut the taxes by half. Property taxes, citizen property taxes were cut by half, and everyone said, "Oh, you can't do this." And 66% of the voters said yes, cut, and they did. So the post-election interviews, for instance, quoted by a guy came out and from voting, and they said, "Could you tell us who you voted for?" "I'm in favor of Prop 13." "Cut." What's your job?" "I work for the state of California." Aren't you cutting off your own sources of revenue? What did he answer? "My home is more important than my job." Okay, that's one of the big lessons which I am trying to have us pay more attention to. Citizens are more important than those that do the loud talking and so forth. Could you just open the door a little more? Thank you. And so in that sense, citizens are harder to measure unless we have things like simple prices of goods. But in general, for the question you asked, which is a classic left-right traditional kind of, and it's appropriate for this section of the course, because the main point of today in this whole section is how the traditional left-right, basically defined by Marxism, but then more loosely, say Lipset's secular Marxism of its style of stressing the disadvantaged versus the elite, etc., which continues today in what we call the New York or the Paris school of urban policy, still has those kinds of concerns. In contrast to the Chicago's the school of the new Chicago school is to focus on politics, culture, and how there's city-specific and issue-specific differences. Okay, we're okay. So in that sense, your question is a Paris, New York question. But to link it to Paris more specifically, and what we talked about just a couple of weeks ago, I had two students sitting in the front row, and I talked about Paris as an example, and how the shopping, the flaneur, etc., was important, and that this developed by a Marxist, a German Marxist, steeped in the classic German Marxist approach, came to France because it didn't fit. And so understanding this, he wrote about it. That was his original contribution, but he also laced this surrounding Marxist stuff, such as, say, such as the boulevards were also to protect the elites, the bourgeois, against the revolutionaries, which many people said, including Haussmann, but the two students from Paris said, what you say about Benjamin is not what we taught, what we learned in Paris at all. How can you explain Benjamin as the consumer? And the answer, he said both. That is, he was trying to sell this to the Marxists. So he therefore did not say, I'm leaving it. So he's saying, of course I'm a Marxist, because he also wanted money and support. He was a man of literature. He didn't have any money. He didn't have an administrative job. So he got grants from here and there, and gifts, or thoughtful people who he convinced, often Jewish, and so he had new ideas, but he didn't want to lose their classic base of strong critical perspective. Okay, so we there is much more which is built on that, and I'm maybe okay. Anybody else have a follow-up question of any of these? Because I'm bleeding into what we're talking about today, and that is the big question is where and why and how do these categories, left and right, unions versus business, or the lack of unions leading to more efficiency, say, and that is, they have workers' organizations in China, but they're not the narrow, active, self-centered unions we have in the U.S. France is the Europeans are in between. They're more the American unions are not so political as the Europeans, who are actively linked with parties and so forth traditionally. They're quiet, but they're not okay. So that those differences are there. So I want to go into that and the theories about this and why. But any more we want to build up on. I mean, the globalization part is good, and in the course we use that book and so forth. Global movements, etc., are important, but the way as we teach the course, the idea is to answer the kinds of questions you're posing from global analysis alone. The answer is look at the institutions within which they're working and which they're shifting the dynamics which are there before and with globalization, and then the answers depends on each of the sections of that course, both in the winter's course on global local politics and in this course right now. Okay, so
it's not a question, but I think related is what you were saying. It really depends on the institution, and like in the case of South Korea, the government subsidized and really.
Can we turn it on you?
Yeah.
Okay, sure. Go ahead.
Like helped create a lot of the.
Remind us your name, please.
Gabriel.
Yeah, Gabriel. Okay,
Yeah.
go ahead.
Like after the Korean War, the South Korean government really helped create a lot of conglomerates we see today, like Samsung or Hyundai or SK, and so in that way, I think. And now, originally they were given like one sector, like Hyundai manufacturing cars or Samsung doing electronics, but now they've expanded so much because of globalization and government support that they really stretch across like every sector. And so I think maybe that's one example of how globalization can help, the strong sort of become stronger.
No, I'd say everything except your last sentence.
Okay.
Which is an open question,
yeah.
but everything you said up to that is excellent. There is a show right now at the Smart Art Gallery on the University of Chicago campus on the Meiji modernism, and the Meiji were the reforms that is that the Japanese were confronting the same kinds of questions as there of globalization. The whole question was how can Japan connect with global forces internationally? Because they in a sense they were like what de Gaulle was concerned about. If we don't change, we're going to be lost. and this was okay. So de Gaulle was quiet. The Japanese were much more open, but they sent out very smart leaders to go to the U.S., to Europe, and to study what they're doing in certain ways that the Japanese could respond. And the answer was not to do the same things as the French or the Americans. They did Japanese things, but their basic answer, and so politically, the big battle, and that's the source of what we're getting into. You're adding other examples, but they're fitting perfectly with the points I want to make, which is to look at the institutional specifics. And in Japan, and I'm now building in Barrington Moore. So in Barrington Moore, which is one of the main readings of this section, the ideas especially come from Barrington Moore, who was a non-dogmatic Marxist in approaching this. The book Social Origins of Dictatorship and Democracy. Okay, the social origins were different in big international ways. And because of your question, we're gonna go to Magi, then we're gonna go back to where and why this is varying cross nationally. The Magi Japanese case built on the national political leadership was dependent both on the strong traditional samurai. These were the fighters, the crusaders in the European context, which we don't have in the U.S. at all, basically. But strong. This is the old aristocracy in Europe, and they financially and economically they were the fighters, but that is they were the political leaders, and they fought the wars. They did not do business. Business was dirty stuff. That was bourgeois. Okay, so they didn't do that. So in Japan, the same thing was. So within France, within Europe, and Japan, you had competition between the bourgeoisie, in a sense, the new business people, and the old traditional aristocratic warriors, the warriors. So the samurai, and so the political leaders said, how can we have a compromise to include the warriors with this new emerging business approach? And so they looked for Americans. They found nothing there in terms of the warriors, so they looked at the Europeans, and they said you can have we can give but the bottom line was the Japanese created the biggest, most important example was exactly what you pointed to, the trading companies. And so the trading and the Japanese, the Koreans, to some degree the Chinese did the same. But the Koreans and the Japanese did this first in 1890, 1900, basically. The Koreans, it was later, China, etc. But the point is, and what's brilliant about the show, you can't so much see it in the show here, but the book about it stresses politics and art in the show. And it features the Japanese shifting from traditional Oriental clothes to having the emperor dress in Western clothes, showing that even the emperor was changing his clothing style as an identity switch. But there are also many military Japanese leaders who are featured in the art, showing the importance of the military within Japan at that time, and these were led by the samurai, that is symbolically the military. Okay, so some of the samurai were given the top leadership positions in the idea, and the implementation was to create big trading companies, and they became Toyota, Sony, later on, these major global trading companies. And yes, they to some degree they may say more automobiles or more electronics, but they tended to be bigger and broader than the American and the European firms. And so the trading companies, in that sense, were a political creation but it transformed the economy. In a sense, you could call it a private, I won't say private public, but it was a samurai. It was a response to the political system, including the importance of the samurai, who could be the top leaders, but they in fact, they were not left to make the management decisions, which were more middle level people who went to, you know, the version of a smart business school or something like that, or, you know, people who could manage well and did so. There's a book which does this. Well, the important follow-up is it wasn't simply, point one is globalization was not imitation at all. It led to major innovations led by the Japanese. Second, planning, using government planning to do so explicitly. After World War II, this was the whole model for the Chinese, the Japanese, and others. It's called MITI, it's the Ministry of Industry. And then they've changed its name now to add consumption and happiness and fun and so forth. And Cool Japan is now is the latest version. The third big point beyond the third big point is in a book by a little bit Lipset in the last book, which we'll read later on. But there's a last chapter on Japan in the book with the title American Exceptionalism. But he shows how American exceptionalism is so different from Japan and where and why. But the bigger argument which Lipset is building on is in a book by Shmuel S.N. Eisenstadt, and it's called, I think, Japanese Culture. And what the big point is to take the 1890s, 1900 big trading firms as an example of about 15 other things which the Japanese started then, but over the 20th century they continually modified it. It wasn't simply to make it more efficient, it was to make it more Japanese, to make it fit, to connect with the Japanese lifestyle more and more specifically, with little modifications, little reforms, that it really worked better and better and would not be seen and felt by the Japanese as an outside imposition, either foreign or as a big trading company. Okay, so that's a bigger answer. That is what I'm answering in terms of the global patterns leading to these trading companies, we can talk about it more and more as we proceed. But let me bring in Barrington Moore, unless you have any follow-up questions from anybody on the Asian link with this. Okay, so we're starting with the Asians, and the creative point of Barrington Moore is not to just focus on Europe, especially continental Europe. So Marx and many, let's say especially Marx and Weber, focused on continental Europe. What Barrington Moore, coming from a Marxist background, he wanted to try to say where and why does the Marxist story change? Not to say it's wrong, but that it's context specific, and and I'm agreeing with that. I mean, I'm agreeing 100% with that general point. It's none of this is really wrong, but the question is where and why and how why are they different? And his title is The Social Base is Different, which I illustrated with the Magi briefly, but he then really stresses the comparison between the European continent, especially France and Germany, versus England. Okay, so the German case, when you took the social analogs, say we discussed with the Magi, there are many studies of the Junkers, so-called, sort of the warriors who built an economic and political base, which is, I think it's now part of Russia. It may have been, it was part of Poland. It was in East Poland. Then I think it's part of Russia. But and so it's connected as well with these battles over there. Ukraine and so forth. So
You're talking about the region of Galicia, which is part of Poland and part of Russia. The old Galicia, yeah. That was the region that you're talking about.
I don't know is my quick answer. But your point of names is that this has changed many times. But it basically, it used to mean, that is, most of Germany was like this, and here we had this over here. It's almost totally geographically separated and much further east. But it's analytically important because it was more like the Japanese samurai. That is, you did not have a bourgeois, business-oriented social base at all. And so this version of Germany, again, was the most different from England. So when you try to contrast the whole German political system, what he's doing is what I generally do. That is, I use a lot of examples at the urban level. That is, going down below the nation, because the nations are too much of a compromise. They mix many different battles going on, or sources of differences. Whereas in this example, you look not just of all of, Germany, northern Germany is Protestant, southern Germany is Catholic. So those are big differences between north and south, whereas this east section is totally different. Neither north or south. It's really east, and it's dominated by the old aristocrats.
Catholics.
Catholics, but
Poles are Catholics.
Yeah, but all of southern Germany is Catholic. But this is very different from southern Germany. Southern Germany has got Porsche and BMW. They've got lots of high tech and very smart entrepreneurial people, and have been there for 100 years. Whereas East Germany did not, and that's in part why they lost. They were taken over by other. Okay, so the politically, they had some degree of impact but why is it? It's not so much. Well, you can see the differences from England, because England did not have this kind of. The big point is why and how were the English different from the continent? Yeah, go ahead. Question.
Because in England, the upper class had less military traditions that they had in France and in Germany. Huh?
I wouldn't say less. They had a bigger empire, as we talked about briefly.
But the notion of status and honor, that's what he mentions, yeah, were much weaker in England.
Well,
that's what he's mentioning.
This is Barrington Moore that you're.
No,
who are you quoting, or what are you drawing from?
I'm quoting. Barrington Moore.
Barrington Moore. Okay.
Yeah, page number.
Okay, so yes,
422.
so fine. So I'm trying to elaborate. But I'm elaborating, but I'm drawing from other books on other studies that link with Barrington Moore.
Yeah.
And the most important single one is the book in the last section, which was Lipset and Rokkan. That it came out 1 year apart from Barrington Moore. It's very similar, but it's a different book, and it's more scholarly. It's a co-authored book with maybe 8 specialists on each country. So there's one on Germany, Juan Lins did the chapters on Germany and Spain. And so he has, lots more detail on this than Barrington Moore. But the English chapter I'm drawing on because it has a very important and a very, very important addition. And I'll give you that to introduce the point of why how and why the English, a fact which is, we're then going to try to interpret. The fact is fits beautifully with the Lipset and Clark book, The Breakdown of Class Politics. What was the breakdown of class politics with the English?
You mean the breakaway from the feudal system?
From the what system?
From the feudal system?
Feudal. No. Well. The quick simple. The feudal system was never very much there. I won't say never. The quick answer, the crude simple answer is probably the feudal system died after 1066 when England was invaded by the Normans. The Normans didn't really have a feudal system, and but the reason they succeeded in conquering England was because they permitted a more federal, in American terms, it's a federal system. It's not quite as strong as the U.S., but it's the same idea. It was decentralization. And so you let different groups, German, Norman, etc., to maintain regional and little individual leadership patterns in their own regions. And so they kept on speaking. Some of them would speak something close to German, others closer to they spoke French by the Normans for several generations, even within England. So but the connection of those was the critical political cultural point, which is I'm trying not to go into but that's what we want to develop in the next section is on political culture. But Barrington Moore uses it. He would never talk about this as a Marxist, but basically, his big point is what he discusses is urban-rural. That is the urban-rural, and the London elites, both linked with the crown and with the court, had some connection with things that were aristocratic, but they also tended to be simultaneously in business. But more important was, how did they then connect with, and the answer was in part what I'm talking about for Target. It's consumption and lifestyle. That is, what did they do in the weekends? They would go to the countryside, and that was different from the Junkers. See, the Junkers would either live here, but they didn't go to. It was too far and too culturally distant. They didn't go back and forth from Berlin to the countryside. The English did, because they were closer to London. And they would go, but not only were they there for a weekend, the English term was not aristocratic, it was not bourgeois, it was gentry. The gentry were leaders of the local commune. So they might have a castle or might have a big house, they might have, and they would do hunting. They would do fox hunting. And so that was an analog, an alternative to the aristocratic military style. So you try to, you try to find the little animals. You look for the fox. Okay, so they chase around after the fox, and that was a classic consumption activity of the English.
It's illegal.
Okay.
Now it's illegal because of Tony Blair, yeah?
Okay, yes, but that is, the illegal. Okay, I'm not trying. I mean, I'm trying to keep the story simple. To get the simple story out, then we can add subtleties like the fox hunt. But if you read as well, and if there's an appendix to the Barrington Moore book, there's a section on the novels of the 19th century, from Dickens through Sherlock Holmes. Take especially Sherlock Holmes. The Sherlock Holmes people, and there are lots of these novels. When I was in high school, I was required to read about 30 of these damn things, and I hated them because they're childish. Childish is too strong, but they would do charades. It was simplistic, and it had sort of proper lifestyle. The exception was Thomas Hardy. So Thomas Hardy was the only one I really liked when I was in high school. But my point is, Barrington Moore says the same thing. He hates this stuff but for him it lowers the level of intellectual discussion, and it was not at all class politics. It wasn't bourgeois, it wasn't aristocratic. It was children's games of what they would like to do. But so what that then connected to were not only the children in the gentry home, but also the people who lived nearby. So the gentry developed a lifestyle of being proud of their local area and developing close personal relations. And in the 19th century, there was no welfare state, so they would help out as an alternative with health, with money, with retirement. When the father has died, the children and the widow are helped by the gentry, passing out some cash continually for years into the future. Okay, so these kinds of close personal connections undermined class consciousness of the peasantry. There was no peasantry really in England. It was you can call them farmers. But the bottom line of this is it had neither bourgeois nor aristocrats. You had a gentry and farmers, and these labels were important. They were not used that way in France. Okay, so in that sense, the English political system built a more consensual, collegial pattern without class politics, or put different. So then the measure was, and this was his first name, Silver. Silver is his last name, same as my co-author. But he's a professor. He did a PhD at Michigan, and then he was on the faculty at Columbia. And there's a chapter in the Lipset and Rokkan book on England by him, with a co-author with an Englishman. And the bottom line for them was what proportion, a simple measure, what proportion of the lower status and farmers and lower status persons more generally in England voted for the Conservative Party. That is, this is left, right, wrong, the Marxist wrong thing to do. False consciousness. I mean, how can you have, the proletarians voting for the Conservative Party? And the answer, and then second question is, how does this compare between England versus the continent, especially France, France and Germany? And the bottom line is there was much more class conscious voting in France and Germany, and much lower. That is, there are many more of the farmers voting Conservative in England. And the answer is why. And the answer basically was because the gentry were not class conscious. They were not fighting. They were not, imposing things from London. They were living there locally with the local farmers, and they felt socially, culturally, and politically together. And so, so starting from that pretty clear, simple, quantitative measure of Tory voting, having more support by these blue collar and farmers, led to the question of why is England so different? So when I was in college, when if you read the stuff which is strictly English, you may have that described a little bit. So people will say, there's lots of books, English history books about we have more consensus. We build, we have gentlemen rather than, class conscious elites. So I mean, Tocqueville said the same thing. Tocqueville came here. Tocqueville said, this is America. This is very different. But there's no aristocrats or top bourgeois people fighting against the political system. Whereas the whole 19th century in France was nasty, bitter conflicts by each group that lost power. They would try to come back and have a revolution and bring in another group, et cetera, et cetera. The English didn't do that at all. They had a consensual empowerment gradually spreading. They didn't have a French Revolution. They had a gradual empowerment by giving more and more subclasses of people who had initially no land, then having a little bit of land, having been a farmer, etc., or owning your own little bit of land, and then having a bigger. I mean, over the early 19th century, the blue collar working farmers grew in number, and the traditional leadership, and especially the aristocrats in England, were largely, I would say, largely lost out. Okay, but it was not done in a revolutionary manner, and so what we saw, stressed by especially Rokkan, and Rokkan with Lipset, was there are other cleavages. In addition to class, economic class, it's also linguistic, as in stronger cases like Belgium, where you have two languages in the whole country, but you still have then regional things linked with accents. And second, religion. So you have political parties on the European continent, Germany and Italy. You have Christian democratic political parties. They're majors, the major parties in Germany and England. Nothing like this in England. Okay, so the point is, so that description, if you will, is the background. So Barrington Moore came along. He saw all this, but he said, why? And where does this work globally? He wants to interpret the whole world, the way Marx did. But how and why? But he wanted to add, am I off? You tell me if we go off the edge. You need to keep looking at that.
Yeah.
Am I off the edge?
No.
Okay. All right. So Barrington Moore like Marx, wanted to interpret where and why these patterns shift, and his big shift was from England to Germany and France, which I basically give you a quick overview. That the social differences between the Junkers and the gentry were so big that led to political divisions nationally in Germany, and they had weaker support for democracy because they wanted their strong views expressed through the political parties, whereas in England they did not. And so what happened after World War I, the Weimar period, democracy, a majority never voted for Hitler, but the history of Germany in the 1920s and 30s was battles, street battles between the communists and the fascist militias, and they were the future. And it was unclear in the 1920s and early 30s who's going to win. It could have been communists, it could have been fascists, but it was not the political centrists at all. Okay, so democracy failed in Germany, and it became for these reasons which Barrington Moore then generalizes to, contrasting with England. But it then becomes more powerful, which he then says, okay, how about Russia and China? And his answer was, it was similar to Germany and France, but more so. The social divisions were stronger still than they were, and in that respect, what did they have politically in 1917? Lenin. Okay, so Lenin had a revolution. Was this a Marxist revolution in the sense that we had a large proletarian people working in factories? No, they were peasants. These were agricultural peasants who were mobilized by Lenin in ways that did not fit the Marxist interpretation, but he politically managed to carry it off. And so this is the battles between the Bolsheviks and the Mensheviks. The Mensheviks were Marxist, but they said we have to wait. We have to build the bourgeoisie. Then we can have the revolution against the tradition, and then we can have a socialist and communist leader. But whereas the Bolsheviks said now, revolt now, but did this say but that is the Mensheviks in that sense wanted to be democratic and let the political system follow this economic pattern. The Bolsheviks said we're going to break with that, and so Lenin did. In China, who was the analog? Mao. What was Mao's position within China? I mean, what was his background before he became, that is, he fought with Chiang Kai-shek. So Chiang Kai-shek mobilized the traditional elite within China. Mao mobilized the normal, if we had Mensheviks, the analogs would be the cities. It should be the bourgeois emerging cities of China, Shanghai, and so forth. But one thing, well, I won't go into battles along the way. That is, there were different, but basically, well, yes, we'll add some of the English. See, internationally, there were some nasty things which the Chinese learned about. Some of the history, including, the drugs were brought to China from these nasty foreigners, especially English and French, who would sell, cocaine and so forth, which were terrible for the Chinese. But second, there were some battles. I think it was, you may know the history better than I. That Chiang Kai-shek allied with some of the English, and there were. So there was as the communist movement was beginning, some of those pro-communist groups in the cities started to fight with Chiang Kai-shek and the English, and and I think that Mao then did not join with them, at least right away, and so the urban leaders of the Communist Party were killed, basically, or destroyed. So the social base, which could have been the urban communist leadership in China, was maybe not totally destroyed, but much weakened. And why? And what was Mao's alternative? The rural. Mao was the head of the rural Communist Party in China. Was this democratic? No. I mean, no more than Lenin. That is, it was too early in terms of, quote, Marxist terms, in terms of the theory, but it wasn't, that is, it wasn't voted in a political democratic manner. It was fought out as a revolution. So as a revolution, Mao, man, it was a bloody, difficult, hard battle against some of the foreigners, and then Chiang Kai-shek and so forth. But in the end, Mao won. And so the political leadership up to present, so what they're talking about now is still the current, there's stories even right now that the top a small number of the top political leaders are the children and grandchildren of the people who fought with Mao personally. And the earlier books saying a generation before, to really be a top political leader, you would be clientelistically connected to the Mao people, and you had in contrast to the clientelism of Italy and Ireland, which is non-political, the Chinese had a more ideological aspect of clientelism, which connected to Mao and to a Mao and the Little Red Book. So the Little Red Book was seen as their version of the Chinese version of Marxism, which was appropriate, and people had to be that is, there was no Little Red Book in Italy or Ireland, or where clientelism is more pure or not non-politically active. Whereas in China it was more politically active through the revolution, but it wasn't through democracy. Okay, so that's the quick story of Barrington Moore. Let's chat briefly on that if anybody has questions about on that or anything else. This is the it's the big story of several readings, even though it doesn't have as many stars as it might appear that way. But I'm showing you the background and the linkages, and I'm giving you the short, simpler story of the Barrington Moore story than I have through the Lipset, Rokkan, and the others. Questions, comments? One thing which I would say to read the multiple readings, the history parts are much clearer and simpler. And so I'm consciously using these examples from Meiji to Lenin and so forth, because I mentioned briefly that the Norwegian chapter by Stein Rokkan is the clearest way to see how the story fits together regionally, and shows how the fjords and the people and he has maps for voting and so forth. So I would say, if you read, for those of you who haven't read everything already, the chapter by Rokkan, even before that chapter, well, read the chapter by Rokkan in the Lipset Rokkan book, and scan the other chapter by Rokkan in the Tilly book, which is more historical. And that shows that's written by Rokkan alone. So I talked about Lipset came to Harvard, talked to Parsons, put together this bigger framework which they use and which you don't see at all in Barrington Moore. And so, in that sense, where and why this developed, you can see the pieces coming together of how Lipset joined with Parsons and with Max Weber and culture more abstractly, in contrast to his earlier, more strictly Marxist work, also connects with Rokkan, which did not have that kind of Marxist tradition in Scandinavia. It's much weaker. But Rokkan was more generally a European comparative analyst. So the comparisons Lipset loved, and they both then extended this. And Barrington Moore did the same kind of thing. They're each trying to build a new framework that is global, that goes in, but using these individual country cases as cases to build a bigger theory. But I'm talking explicitly to some degree also about the construction of this theory. It was happening very much in these years when this was published, around 1968. So this was also the same years as I discussed, the 60s in Europe and the U.S. were the years of the rise of a new sort of Marxism with the counterculture. It was okay. So I wanted to say, read first the historical accounts of the sections, especially page 590 in the Tilly book by Rokkan, and then the Lipset and Rokkan pages 27 to 29. These are very specific pages, 1 page, 2 pages. These show you where they come from, and then they come together more coherently on pages 37 and 38. So these are key sections which look at these just enough to see what the key dimensions are. Then focus on how these are used. Reading, for example, first pages 9 to 26. See, so I'm saying reading later on, then going back and reach page 9 to 26 in Lipset and Rokkan, which is a synopsis of West European history in terms of the cleavages that emerged from the Middle Ages to the 1960s. Okay, then pages 575 to 591 in Tilly makes the key historical points. Then after that, look at the more abstract, but don't expect to find any more than the scaffolding, which is not elaborated in detail here, but it in turn connects with the future analysis, say, of a broader interdisciplinary global kind of theorizing. Okay, that's my quick overview. But they tie together nicely with your questions, and the answers are here if you read them right. Silence. Sharon, you've been generally silent. You now, this is a big, I say, I mean, it links China with the West, which is also one reason that I know you're interested in these issues. Anything you want to raise about any of this, or?
No.
Okay. That is where and how, and what we get bits of in Barrington Moore and these other places. If you go to the history of each of these countries, we can try to connect with. I mean, not just say China does this, but having the battles between Chiang Kai-shek and Mao, and then later on when things were going too far away from the Little Red Book, we have the Cultural Revolution inside China to to bring it back to that. And so in that sense, it was but it didn't go through, changing the, trying to co-opt the political leadership. It was imposed from above. Okay, so where and how the hierarchy fits with these in some cases military and violent kinds of and battles which connect social bases. Okay. We are at the end. Thank you for good questions, and we will continue the next section on some of these same themes, but we'll frame this more generally with the new social movements on Wednesday.